World situation at the moment is quite complex, especially when it comes to the relationship between United States, Russia, and Ukraine. But also the Middle East is in a flux at the moment with Trump's so-called peace plan for Gaza. In the next few minutes about these issues, but some also important for United States on the internal side. I'm going to speak with retired General Ben Hodges, former commander of U.S. Army Europe. General, welcome back to Program N1.
Thank you very much for the privilege.
General, let me start with something what's internal issue at the moment, but quite unusual issue in United States. Several senators and congressmen have issued a video clip in which they called service members and members of security and intelligence agencies to do not fulfill illegal orders by their commanders, bosses, or president of the United States. That is not an unusual call, but what the president did in the aftermath is quite unusual. He's calling them seditious elements, and he's calling for that penalty against them. Secretary of Defense Hegseth have said that he's thinking about reactivating Senator Kelly to be court-martialed. How do you see this situation, and is this probably announcement of their fight with the people from military who served, who are speaking against their actions or seeing their action differently?
So I've never seen something like this, not in my life, although it did happen back after our Civil War, back in the 1860s. I think if the president and his supporters say that everything that he does and says is lawful, then I don't understand why they are so worried or angry that some congressmen and senators would remind soldiers of their oath to the Constitution and that they are not obligated to obey unlawful orders. So I think the reaction of the president and the secretary is to me very interesting. Why are they worried? Secondly, I think that this is not going to go anywhere. I mean, the Secretary of Defense does not really have the authority to do what he said he was going to do. And the Congress, even the Republicans, are not going to just stand by and watch their fellow members treated like this. So I think this will eventually fade away, but it's important that for soldiers to always be reminded about their oath to the Constitution, not to the president, to the Constitution. I have taken that oath and I have administered that oath hundreds of times in my Army life, my career. And we do this so that soldiers are always confident that what they're doing is within the context of the law and that it is their duty not to obey an unlawful order. I learned this when I was a cadet back in the 1970s. This was right after Vietnam, right after the My Lai massacre. And we learned you could not say, I was only following orders. That is not a legitimate defense. So I think what these 6 members of the Congress did was important.
General, President often says that he's a president of law and order and that he's bringing law and order to American cities. But what we are seeing at the moment is that he brought in National Guard to be policing Americans. And we saw what happened with these 2 unfortunate members of National Guard in the DC. How do you see that situation? Is that the right way to use National Guard to police Americans and to use them as a regular fighters against crime, or there is a better use for them and their skills at the moment?
So there's no doubt that we have crime that is too high in many parts of America. Interestingly, the highest murder rates are in what we call red states. They're not just in New York or Chicago or Los Angeles, but actually murder rates are even higher in states like Alabama or Florida or Tennessee. And so uh, there is no doubt that there has to be something done about high crime. But bringing in National Guard, uh, who are not trained to do this sort of thing, um, I don't know that that's the best use. And I said this before the shooting yesterday. Um, I think, investing in quality police, investing in making sure you have enough law enforcement at the local level, the state level, and yeah, that's to me, that's the way you fight this, and of course through education. Um, but the president has chosen to use the National Guard. Some governors, some states support it, others don't. Um, Ultimately, the states have responsibility and authority here that they have to do their job also.
Then let's move to the issue of Ukraine. We saw that 28-point plan about ending this war. President has promised that he's going to finish this war in 24 hours, and we are almost a year into his term, and the war is still not done. But when you see some of those proposals, who are maximalistic proposals coming from Russia, such as taking 20% of Ukrainian land, limiting armed forces of Ukraine, stopping their way to NATO. How do you see that situation? And if this happens, hopefully not, will the rest of Europe be in danger, especially the eastern flank?
So first of all, there's two premises that we should all be clear on when we talk about these negotiations. Number one, um, Russia and unfortunately the United States have the mindset that Russia is winning the war, that it's inevitable, and that Ukraine is losing. So that's the frame of reference. And so therefore, Russia and the US have moved forward with proposals on that basis that Russia is winning, Ukraine is losing. Now, this is not true. That's not what's happening on the ground. The Ukrainians know that they are not losing, but the narrative is that Russia is winning, Ukraine is losing, and that's the start point from the US side and the Russian side that Ukraine, you're going to have to give up land. So that's the biggest problem in all of this. The second thing that everybody should think about when we talk about Russia, Russia and Vladimir Putin clearly actually do not want peace. If they wanted peace, if that was their objective, they would just leave. They would have never invaded Ukraine back in 2014 and then a large scale invasion in 2022. Um, and so uh, I think most European countries know that Russia cannot be trusted in this. The Ukrainians know that Russia will not live up to its agreement. It never has. Um, and so this is why the Ukrainians correctly are demanding some sort of security help so that when Russia starts again, Ukraine will not be so vulnerable. And the idea, one of the demands was that Ukraine had to reduce the size of its army. Who does that benefit? That only benefits Russia, of course. So that would be a huge mistake. Um, I think the other non-negotiable for the Ukrainians was the idea that Russians would get amnesty for all of their war crimes. I think that also that's non-negotiable. They cannot accept that. Finally, um, we Europe has unfortunately completely failed to be an alternative. They Europeans complain that the U.S. is doing this without them, but Europe as a whole has not been consequential, and that's why the Americans don't bother to include them. The problem here is that if Ukraine fails, then Europe is going to get the problem. They're going to have millions more Ukrainian refugees coming into Central and Western Europe. You're going to have thousands of Ukrainian soldiers will be forced into the Red Army, and the Russians, Putin is going to feel emboldened to do more, perhaps Moldova, perhaps Latvia, and so this Europe has got to act, has got to come together and use its leverage and regain self-confidence. Otherwise, this is only going to get worse.
Some have advocated in Europe that Europe should react to this the same way as Russia is doing it supposedly in European cities, such as to send the drones or to try to scare them off as they're doing on European soil. We saw that with Poland and Denmark and Belgium and Germany. Is that the right way, or the right way is to give enough support to Ukraine and force them to be scared of Ukraine, not from Europe, and to think, what will Europe do the next?
Yeah. So I think these what we call gray zone operations, what Russia is doing with drones and sabotage and shadow fleet vessels and disinformation and murder, interfering with the elections, all of these things are designed, number one, to distract people from helping Ukraine, for populations to get scared, to be worried, and to put pressure on their government not to help Ukraine. I think that's the number one purpose. The second purpose is to create vulnerabilities in the West, to cause us to come apart, to lose confidence in each other and in our own governments. And so the Russians are going to continue doing these things until until Europe inflicts consequences on them. There is just too much emphasis placed on attribution. Are you sure that was a Russian that did that? Are you sure this was a Russian that did this? And of course, it's never going to be a Russian waving a Russian flag, but the Russians are behind all of it. And so here, Europe has got to find ways to inflict consequences on Russia each time something happens. That's the only thing the Russians will respect, even if they complain about it. And this only works well if nations work together to stop it. Now, the best way to defend and protect Europe, to keep Europe from a war, of course, is to help Ukraine defeat Russia. I mean, keep Russia on the back foot. Have Russia retreating. Have Russia trying to defend its oil and gas infrastructure. Because if they cannot export oil and gas to China and India, this war is going to be over anyway. So Russia should be worried about Europe, not Europe always worrying about what Russia might do.
Now, let's move to the Middle East. First question is, we recently saw a new president of Syria, Ahmed al-Sharaa, playing basketball with U.S. generals. Have you ever thought that we will see a situation like that the generals who were hunting for al-Sharaa until a few months ago as a former terrorist and member of al-Qaeda to play basketball with him and welcome him as a statesman, now recognized on the world stage?
No, I did not. I did not envision that. But if that helps get to a situation where you have a long-term sustainable peace in the region, where people are allowed to live their life, not in fear, but to go about like normal people and live their life, then I don't have a problem with that. Um, this region has been torn apart for so long um, because of dictators and warring factions. And so now, if you've got somebody that is able to provide some stability and that can be trusted, then I think it's worth pursuing. But no, and to answer the question, I would not have imagined that.
And one more question for the end of this conversation, but not least important, is President has presented this so-called peace plan for Gaza, but that's a 20 sentences written on a paper without much substance. We know that here in the Western Balkans, how important it is to know details. Do you think that this plan could work, and especially that so-called stabilization force to be the real cornerstone for security and stability in the region, especially when it comes to Gaza, because the Prime Minister have said, I don't want to allow any Palestinian state in the Middle East from Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. How that will work? Because President has one vision, Netanyahu and Ben Gvir had the second and third, and then Palestinians are somewhere still trying to figure it out what they want to do.
So, this war, Israel's war with Hamas with Palestinians, has always been about land. And so until there is some sort of resolution where there is land for Palestinians and land for Israelis, then this is going to continue. And I think um, it will take some security force to provide confidence that that will enable some sort of governing body to administer and take over on the Palestinian side. I don't know the right answer for this, but it has to be a real peacekeeping force with rules of engagement and a clear mandate. Um, and I think, the Israeli side is going to have to, I should say this, Netanyahu his government is going to have to acknowledge a need for land for Palestinians. And I don't know that their all or nothing approach, if that's the path to a long-term sustainable peace.
General, thank you so very much for your time and this conversation.
Esmer, thank you once again for the privilege.